All right, we're live.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Lee. I'm founder of the Data Incubator. We're a data science training and AI company. We're probably best known for the fellowship that we run, which is a free fellowship for master's and PhD students who are looking to enter the industry as data scientists. It's totally free for the fellows who get in. And if you're interested, you can apply online at www.thedataincubator.com. And we also have a number of online courses for working professionals or others who are looking to learn a bit more about data science, but in a part-time capacity, as well as corporate training options if your company is looking to get trained up on data science. And you can sign up also at thedataincubator.com to either sign up or learn more. So today we're going to be doing another talk in our web series, Data Science in 30 Minutes. This is a regular monthly series on data and its role in the world. And past speakers have included Kirk Bourne, the Director of Data Science at Booz Allen Hamilton, Holden Corral, who's an engineering lead at IBM, and one of the core contributors to Apache Spark, Zubin Garmani, the Chief Scientist at Uber and a professor at Cambridge, Sam Swift, a VP of Data Science at Betterment, and a former TDI fellow, and many, many more. And if you'd like to hear those or any of our other past Data Science in 30 Minutes episodes, you can go onto our website, thedataincubator.com, to find out more. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, I want to remind everyone that you can pose questions in the YouTube chat area, and we'll be monitoring those. And I will pose those to the speaker towards the end of his talk. And you have to be logged into your Google account to do this. So I'd encourage you to do that now if you aren't already. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker. It's my great pleasure to be connecting with one of the preeminent figures in the data science community, Doug Laney. He's a senior analyst and advisor with Gartner's Chief Data Officer Research Group, and he's an accomplished practitioner and recognized authority. I see him all over the place at different events and all over the internet, and he's very well respected. He's also teaching economics at the University of Illinois, and in the 90s he coined the term the 3 Vs, so volume, velocity, and variety, that you hear so often in industry. So without further ado, I will let Doug take it away.
Thanks, Michael. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your and all of your fans today. Much appreciated. So a couple of things. One, I don't know about the data science community, but I focus more on the chief data officer community. I know they're very closely joined at the hip, so that's cool. So yeah, I'm one of the analysts at Gardner. That's part of our data and analytics strategy team, which is part of our larger data and analytics group. However, I don't focus myself on vendors or technologies too much. I stay more oriented toward the business issues around data, particularly the things that chief data officers are concerned about. So let me share the screen here, and we'll get going. You see that all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to talk about this topic of this crazy idea of Infonomics, which is basically the economics of information, or how information can really be leveraged and wielded and understood and measured as an actual corporate asset. I'll give you a little bit of background on it. The background on Infonomics, it kind of dates back to the 9/11 terror attacks, when some clients called us lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but the loss of their data. And after they lost their data, naturally, they contacted their insurers to submit claims for the value of the data they lost. The insurers, however, said, no way. We don't consider data to be a property. A number of court cases ensued, and anyway, it became a bit of a mess. Kind of caught my attention, and I started wondering, why isn't information considered? Why isn't it considered, property? And so I started looking into that. But what the insurance industry did was, because they realized they were a bit exposed, they updated a key insurance standard, the Commercial General Liability Policy Standard, to specifically explicitly exclude data from P&C insurance contracts. So they effectively doubled down on the antiquated notions that information isn't an asset. And then, not to be outdone, The accounting profession followed suit a few years later to update a key financial standard to prevent companies from capitalizing or representing the value of their data on their balance sheets. So today, most organizations are trying to move forward and treat information more as an asset, but the keepers of the definition of what constitutes property, what constitutes an asset, have kind of gone a bit retrograde. Of course, there was also a U.S. congressional hearing on how to evolve a 1930s style accounting system into the 21st century. As you can well imagine, the outcome of that was absolutely nothing. But some accountants got up and testified that the lack of ability to quantify data's value and record it as a balance sheet asset was creating undue market volatility. So anyway, I'm not really in the business of changing accounting standards, just kind of expressing that perhaps the road we're headed down with continuing to deny information asset class status is a bit of a problem. But let's move on to, did you want to jump in, Michael, or no?
No, go ahead.
So, all that accounting stuff kind of aside for a bit, we often hear people talk about information as the new oil. And while that certainly represents people understand data has value, it misses the point that information has unique economic characteristics that make it potentially much more valuable than oil or more valuable than cash. Think about a drop of oil. How many times can you consume that drop of oil? Once, and then it's burned up and it's gone away. How many different ways can you consume that drop of oil simultaneously? Well, one. You can only use it for a single purpose. Information is very different. Information is what economists would call a non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset, in that you can use it in multiple ways simultaneously, and when you do use it, it doesn't go away. You can use it again and again until, as long as it holds some relevance. Also, whenever you use data, it typically generates more data. So the output of a data science, of an algorithm or something, is often more data. Or if you apply data in a business process, you're creating the potential to capture more data about how that business process executed. So data's got these unique economic characteristics that make it a lot more different and potentially more valuable than oil. So I kind of like to correct people when they suggest data is the new oil. And if you look at what is considered an asset, no matter what definition you look at, information actually meets the criteria of an asset. It's something that can be owned and controlled, it can be exchangeable for cash, and it can generate economic value. And that's really the definition of an asset. But again, the accountants haven't come around to acknowledging that. There have been some discussions within the accounting industry, but nothing has happened. But my point is that we think it's really incumbent upon organizations to actually behave as if information is an asset. So then we turn to look at companies that behave, speaking of behavior, behave in certain information savvy ways. Three things we look for in companies. Do they have a chief data officer or somebody at an executive level who's responsible and accountable for the corporate information assets? Do they have an enterprise data governance function, an indicator to us that they're serious about controlling data much in the same way that other assets are controlled? And third, unsurprisingly, the thing we looked for is, do they have a data science organization? And when we found organizations that had those three things, we found that they have a 2 times higher market to book value than other companies. This is not 2%, not 20%. This is 200%. There's something that investors favor in companies that have show these characteristics. And just for good measure, we took out of the equation the information product companies. We took out of the equation the Googles and TripAdvisors and folks like that, the folks that, and the Nielsen's that make money on data specifically. We wanted to see what about, normal companies. So there's something to be said for becoming an information savvy company. But to the point, Infonomics is really about these three things. So Michael, you mentioned the 3 V's that I came up with like 20 years ago. These are the 3 M's. I come up with something alliterative, I guess, every 20 years. So this is the 3 cornerstones of Infonomics are monetizing, managing, and measuring information as an actual asset. And by monetizing, we don't necessarily mean selling data. We mean generating economic benefits from it. Economic benefits can come in a variety of forms, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then managing information as an asset implies applying real asset management principles and practices to information, borrowing from the way that we do this with other kinds of assets, like physical assets and financial assets. And then there's measuring information as an asset, which is something a lot of companies don't do. And the way this all kind of flows together is really the old adage: you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think it follows that you can't monetize what you don't manage well. So for many companies, this is a vicious cycle where it should be more of a virtuous cycle. So let's jump into each one for a moment. So monetizing information, there's a variety of ways we can do this internally and externally, or indirectly and directly. So indirect forms of data monetization involve improving processes, improving sales or customer satisfaction or things like that, using data internally to drive some not necessarily financial benefits, but other kinds of KPIs, if it were. And then you can also use data to develop new products or markets. You can analyze what's going on in social media to identify white space or red space in a market, or use it to improve partner relationships throughout your ecosystem. I'm going to skip the branded indices for a second. And then more direct forms of monetization involve bartering or trading with information. And there's a particular benefit to bartering or trading with information than selling it outright. If you sell data to somebody for cash, then it becomes a financial transaction that has to be recorded and is taxed. If you barter with information, on the other hand, it's something you can receive goods and services or favorable terms and conditions from a business partner without it being a recognized transaction. So there's particular benefits to that. Also, you can control the market a little bit better that way too. One great example of this that we all do is we scan our loyalty cards at the grocery store. And while we think we're getting a discount, that's not really what's happening. What's really happening, probably most of you know, I see Michael smiling. What's really happening is you're exchanging information about you and your purchase for free food. It's a barter transaction. It's not a discount. So they like to call it a discount because they don't want us to think about what they're doing with our data. But so that's fine. But the reality is it's a barter transaction. So you can also use data to enhance products or services. You can bake it into existing products or services. So think about any product or service that you offer today and how to incorporate data into that product or service. You can also sell data directly yourself or through data brokers or an emerging class of data marketplaces like Quandl or Dowex or Data Republic. You can also buy data from them as well. Or you can do like what Gartner does, who I'm with. We sell insights and analysis. We don't sell the raw data from our surveys or from our clients directly. We aggregate it and analyze it and synthesize it into some reports. So back to branded indices for a second. If you've got data that you want to monetize, and particularly externally, take a page out of the book of what somebody like ADP does, the payroll processing company. They have a business selling data or selling insights. And the way that they advertise generally and promote that capability is they publish an employment index on a periodic basis, which is known to be more accurate and timely than even the US government's own number, and more available, especially when the government's shut down. So so they don't publish that just to be clever or cute or poke a finger in the eye of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They publish it as a shout out that they've got additional data for sale. So how do you go about so let's talk about analytics for a second, because we're data scientists here, and I feel your pain, which is trying to get organizations to do more diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. We all grew up on a steady diet of Excel and Lotus 1, 2, 3, building pretty pie charts and bouncy bar charts and dashing dashboards, and none of that has ever significantly moved the needle on the business. And you all probably know this, but at Gartner, we're trying to get across the point to chief data officers, CIOs, business leaders that really, if you really want to do significant things with data, you've got to do some more. You got to ask more detailed questions, not what happened in the past, but why is something happening, what's going to happen, and how can I make something happen? And it's really incumbent upon data scientists to be consultative with business people to help them ask those questions. Business person will come to you and say, I want to know what we sold in the Western region last last quarter. Well, that's crap. Why do you want to know? The real question is, how can we sell more? Why did we only sell that amount? How can we sell more? And what does next quarter look like, so we can attenuate inventory levels and pricing and things like that. So those are the more detailed questions that most business people really need help with asking. And a lot of times it involves developing some hypotheses. So my admonition to data scientists is, don't call yourself a data scientist unless you're following the scientific method. If you don't know what the scientific method is, and know how to generate a hypothesis and gather data and test data and go through that scientific process, then you're a business analyst or a statistician at best. Okay? I'll get off my soapbox there for a second. But all of that involves ways to better monetize your data. We've collected hundreds of examples, and you can see here this art of the possible. So I've collected nearly 500 examples of how organizations have generated significant economic benefits from data, and almost none of them have to do with building pretty pie charts. They all have to do with embedding analytics into a business process. But how do you go about monetizing data? It's really no different than the way that you the way you go about managing any other kind of product. There's really not a lot new here, other than the fact that you can draw inspiration from how others have done it. Don't just look to your own industry, and then also gather data that isn't your own. Gather data from social media, from commercial data brokers, from public data sources, harvested web content, dark data that's hidden throughout the organization. That's really where the real value comes from, when you intersect that data with the more traditional operational data. Plenty of examples on how companies have done that. We probably don't have time for a lot of examples, but trying to think which ones I'm going to get into here. Infinity Insurance realized they were sitting on a gold mine of adjuster reports, and they text mine the adjuster reports to identify indicators of fraud. They're now capturing way more fraud than they used to, and have been able to subrogate millions of dollars of previously fraudulent claims. Dollar General has a self-funding data warehouse. Minute Maid has a precise dynamic formula for how to blend orange juice based on a quintillion data points that they collect from satellite imagery to cost pressures and so forth. They can replan the entire business within 5 to 10 minutes if there's a hurricane or a frost. Lockheed Martin mines project emails and other project documentation to get leading indicators of project issues, which have led to a savings of hundreds of millions of dollars for them, based on an idea that I gave them some years ago. And so there are a lot of really, really great examples of how data is being used. And if any of you are Gartner clients and you want to see some of these examples, you can just submit a request, and I can share a boatload of them with you. We actually believe that by the end of the decade here, a significant portion of organizations are going to have a profitable business unit for monetizing their data. This is already taking shape, and this number actually may end up being low. So let's talk about managing information as an asset. One of the things I do is review data strategy documents. And then so I reviewed a client's data strategy document a while ago, an energy company, and they said, like many data strategy documents, it says we're going to, information is our greatest asset, and we want to manage information as an asset. I look at the document, and there's nothing in there about inventorying their data. Now, how are you going to manage anything as an asset if you don't even have an inventory of what exists? So I mentioned this to them, and they're like, well, yeah, we only inventory our major assets like our trucks and our transformers and our generators. And I say, well, that's great. Why don't you apply that same discipline to your data assets? And they say, well, okay, that's a great idea. Maybe we should do that. And then after I'm done with the meeting, I go into the men's room, and this is what I see. They've inventory tagged their urinals. The company that claims they only inventory their major assets like their trucks and their transformers, and oh, by the way, their toilets, because this is physical plant. Toilets are on the balance sheet, right? But your data is not. And this is why we inventory ridiculous things like toilets and sinks and laptops and things like that, where the real value is in the data. So how do we change this? Well, we apply asset management principles and practices from other domains. If you're a material asset company like a retailer or a manufacturer, apply the physical asset management practices that you're already using in the realm of information management. If you're a financial services company, apply financial asset management practices to information. If you're a workforce management company, borrow and learn from what you how you manage workforces and apply those same kind of principles. Where do you get them from? Oop, I skipped that. But there are tons of ISO standards for how to manage different kinds of assets that can and should be applied to managing information. And without getting into detail on that, because we don't have time, one of the things I've done is boil this all down into a set of what I call generally accepted information principles, which can really form the basis for any kind of organization. They're detailed in my book, and also in some Gartner research. I'll highlight a few of them here. One is the asset assumption, that information should be considered and treated as an asset because it actually meets the criteria of one. There's also the jurisdiction constraint, to understand that the provenance, lineage, ownership, and so forth of data is very difficult to ascertain. So instead, you should focus on rights. You shouldn't worry about who owns the data or things like that. You should focus more on rights. And then one of the main principles is this replicability principle, which is, we all love to move data around and make copies of it. But every time you make a copy of data, you're increasing your attack surface. You're increasing the cost and expense of having to synchronize data. You're increasing the probability that it's not synchronized, and people throughout the business are making decisions using different data. So our recommendation is to be economically circumspect every time you're moving or copying data. And nobody should be allowed to do so unless there's an economically viable reason to do so, not including convenience. All right. Gartner has a maturity model for how to manage information more as an asset and kind of gauge where you are on a variety of dimensions here. Other folks have maturity models as well. None is really better than another. Our research is very much tagged to these 7 dimensions, however. So now let's talk about measuring information as an asset, and then I'll take some questions. So, kind of remembering the sage words of Dr. George Box, the head of the American Statistical Association, famous, I think he's a Nobel Prize-winning statistician, mathematician, who famously quipped, and you'll know the end of this, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Right.
That's right.
So with that in mind, I'll share with you a little bit about Gardner's valuation models that we developed, and then talk about how some of our clients are actually using them. So we wanted to create some leading indicators, some lagging indicators, some indicators of data value that are more focused on managing it better, other indicators that are more focused on the monetizing it better, on the economic characteristics. So we created these foundational measures that look at things like the intrinsic value of information based on, it's more of an amalgam of key quality characteristics and scarcity. The business value is an amalgam of quality characteristics like accuracy and completeness, but also relevancy. How relevant is this data asset across a range of business processes? And that gives us an idea of what its potential value is. And then the performance value is more empirical. It asks, how does having this data actually impact the business process? And so that'll give you an idea of how does it move the needle on some KPI. And often this will involve running some kind of experiment to determine the actual value of data in that context. And then we have the financial measures, which all we've done is borrow from the way that valuation experts have valued any kind of asset, using the cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach, or the economic value add approach. So the cost value says, what did it cost us to collect this data in the first place, or to generate it, or what would it cost us if we lost it? And that's kind of a baseline reading upon which you layer the market value and the economic value to make sure that you're generating some margin, some return on information asset. And unless you can measure those costs, you have no idea what the return on your information is. The market value is interesting because the market value model, unlike, if I were to, what I have here, if I were to sell you, my phone here, I can only sell it once, and then I've lost control of it. I've lost ownership of it. When you sell data, you're actually transferring rights to use it. You're not transferring ownership of it, which means you can sell it again and again and again, or license it again and again and again. So determining the market value for information is a little bit more complicated than determining the market value for physical assets. And then there's the economic value, which takes into consideration information's impact on a revenue stream or on expense savings or both. And obviously you want that value to be bigger than the cost value. And I'll show you what some of our clients have determined. So I'm not going to share the detailed models here. We don't have time, but they're very simple formulas. And most of our clients have adapted these models for their own purposes, and they get less hung up on the actual values themselves than on tracking the delta over time. So it's more important to look at the trajectory of, is the cost of data being reduced? Is the economic value increasing? Is the data quality increasing? Things like that. So, there are the models. I've got them in here, but I'm not going to spend any time on them. But I'll flash them here quickly.
And it seems like
a
lot of the terms are pretty, they're subjective, right? So it sounds like
subjective. Yep.
It sounds like what you have to do is really maintain consistency in how you interpret it.
Exactly, and that's what the key that any valuation expert will tell you. The key to valuing something is documenting your assumptions and then applying them consistently, period over period. Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because there's really no standardized way to value information. So it's not on the balance sheet. It's not auditable. Nobody's comparing one company to the next too much. So it doesn't really matter. What's more important for you is understanding that delta and understanding that the value you're generating from data is greater than the cost of it. Let me share with you quickly how some of our clients are using these models. Boeing here, we help Boeing identify data that has a low quality index, a low information intrinsic value, and a high business value, meaning it's data that should be used more than it is, and has low quality index. So they said that's the data we should be focusing on managing. We can't manage all data equally. We need to focus and prioritize and budget for it. So they're doing that. The financial services firm AIG showed us how they're connecting the dots between data quality and business process performance. They can track how a 1% increase in data accuracy or a 3% increase in data completeness impacts business processes where that data is actually used. Another company showed us how they can they track data that they realized they were underutilizing their data. They had a lot of dark data, and so they said, let's find data that has a low economic value. It's not being used very much, not generating business benefits, but has business potential. And they innovated around those underperforming information assets and added $300 million of market value on a $2 billion business. Other clients come to us and they ask, what data should we be monetizing? And the simple answer to that is, monetize data that has a low cost structure, has a high intrinsic value, a high quality index, and a high business relevancy, particularly to others. This just shows that you can expand the economic value of information by monetizing it externally. And then one of our clients, an energy company, Miso Energy in Indiana, showed us how they identified some data that cost them more than the economic value it was generating. And because they're in a regulated industry, they really couldn't innovate around that data too much. So they said, let's dispose of it. Let's build a defensible disposal business case for this underperforming information asset that has actually a net negative value. And they're now saving millions of dollars a year in unnecessary infrastructure costs by having deleted that data. So anyway, that's how some of our clients are using the data. We're actually finding that equity analysts are starting to be concerned with not only the data and analytics capabilities of companies, but the value of the data itself. We're working with a few M&A firms to help them calculate the value of a company's data assets, even though it's not a balance sheet asset. And then just kind of in summary, our basic guidance is to monetize data in a wide variety of ways. Don't just get fixated on one way to generate value from information. Look more broadly at all the internal and external, indirect and direct methods of monetizing data. Explore them all simultaneously. Manage your information by applying asset management principles and practices that your business is already familiar with. And in that way, you kind of endear yourself to the business because you're using the same vernacular as well that they already use. And then measure your information to understand both its potential value and its actual value, and do those comparisons that can drive certain kinds of behaviors. So those of you who are interested in taking an Info Savvy quiz, we've got a quiz up on our website, Gardner.com/Infonomics. And then here's a little bit about the book. And I just want to stop here and take any questions. I know I moved pretty quickly through these topics. It's a pretty weighty topic, and I'm going to be teaching it at the University of Illinois this spring as part of their Masters of Accounting program. The course will be available to degree students and non-degree students over Coursera. So keep an eye out for that.
Yes, I was going to say I think it's a very interesting book, and I've certainly added it to my reading list.
Thank you.
Um, so I'm very interested. Personal question: measure, manage, monetize. Is there
Mhm.
a specific order that companies should sort of approach that if they're just getting started?
That's a great question. So I like to start with the end in mind, and that's why I put the monetize first, and sort of create a vision of what you can do with data is really I think the primary thing. But really, I think they all go hand in hand, and they certainly go together. You can improve the way that information is managed by inventorying it, starting to quantify its quality characteristics, assessing its economic value, its financial value, which can drive certain kinds of information management behaviors. Once information management is improved, then the possibilities for monetizing it also improve. So I would say it's more of a function like this than in any particular order. Yeah.
And is there sort of a success story that you can share with a company that's kind of just getting started? Like,
Yeah.
how do I, a company, how do I find that low-hanging fruit
Mhm.
that kind of gets me the quick win that justifies the larger budget and the expanded
Yeah. So from an
presence?
analytics, standpoint, I would say, most of the examples that we see are very vocational and very functionally specific. The high value examples don't have anything to do with enterprise class solutions, yada yada. For the most part, they're very functionally specific, and so there's a lot of quick wins to be had by just combining two data sets, identifying an opportunity, and then operationalizing it. That's the hard part. Often is that cultural move to changing the way that something's done in the organization. And I know that's a constant source of frustration for data scientists as we came up with this great idea and nobody's acting on it, right?
Oh,
And
I
that can be
completely agree.
very,
And this is,
very, very
as
frustrating.
as we talk to CDOs all the time,
Yeah,
this is one of the things we hear over and over again. How do you suggest that data organizations
yeah,
uh, create that influence so that
mhm,
they can get others to play
right.
ball, so to speak?
So one is that list of examples that we have, we share them with our clients, and that inspires them to, or shames them into doing things that other companies have done. They're like,
That's a good one.
small zoo in Washington, actually the Port Defiance Zoo there in Washington, where you are, has done some really incredible things with data to triple or quadruple the number of memberships, and it's a very simple, basic solution. And so when you share these examples with clients, they want to share them with their business people to help them be inspired or shamed into action. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
good one. That's a good
Yeah.
one. Uh, and then one question from the audience:
Mm.
Where do you like to keep your data, or do you recommend companies keep their data? Cloud solutions, in-house?
Um, I don't really have too much of a preference with that. Again, I don't cover data. Um, I don't cover data management solutions too much, but I think it's pretty clear everything's moving to the cloud. Being able to substitute OpEx for CapEx and having the dynamic scalability and performance is really is really great. So I know there are, of course, the security concerns, but I would caution that probably most of the cloud companies have better security than you do.
That's what
So
I always say.
yeah,
I'm pretty sure Google can keep a
yeah,
system secure better than I can. So,
right. Yeah, so
um,
some companies keep keys or keys locally, and then some of the data maybe more encrypted in the cloud. If you feel comfortable doing that, then great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then last question, there's a lot of talk around blockchain-based models for
Mhm.
sort of exchanging of data
Yeah.
and sort of trading of data. Curious where you see that and maybe how that plays with what you're writing about.
Yeah. So blockchain, of course, is great for recording immutable transactions, and um, I'm not sure it particularly has a role in transaction processing too much yet because of the performance issues involved. Perhaps they're going to be overcoming sometime soon. I've also seen some articles just this week on how the blockchain was previously seen as being unhackable, and there have been some great, incredible examples of blockchain being hacked lately. So the pendulum may swing back a little bit. We'll see. My colleague Dave Furlonger is writing a book on blockchain that is due out, I think, sometime this year. So keep an eye out for that. He's really our expert on that. But there's some really interesting examples of how it's been used. I just don't think for high volume transactions yet it's ready for prime time.
Yeah, yep. That certainly seems to be the case. So I
Yeah.
want to thank our audience for joining us. I want to
Thank you.
thank our speaker. And if you're interested, Doug's book is called Infonomics.
Yeah.
You can buy that on Amazon, and currently you
Yeah.
can listen to it on Audible as well.
Right. Right. And luckily, I don't narrate it. Professional does. I narrate the introduction. That's about it. Yeah. And it's available in ebook and printed copies as well. And if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask any follow-on questions or explore the topic further, I'm always posting on the topic and willing and ready to engage and learn some new ideas.
Perfect. And if you're interested in learning more about data science, you can always take our free data science fellowship for PhDs and master's students, or look at our online courses or corporate training offerings, which are all
Great.
available at thedataincubator.com. Thank you so much, Doug, for
Thanks so
taking the
much,
time.
Michael. Take care,
Cheers.
everyone. Cheers. Bye.